I tell everybody that Suzanne is the biggest cheerleader in the pro-life movement for everyone else. She and Rachel both, to the point where she doesn't even recognize what a powerhouse she is. Last June, I was standing with her and Rachel and Angel in Washington, D.C., and people kept coming up to Suzanne and saying, congratulations. And she was like, I don't know what these people are talking about. And they just kept saying congrats. And finally somebody said, Suzanne, congratulations on being Pro-Life Woman of the Year. And she was like, what are you talking about? I am not the Pro-Life Woman of the Year. And the lady was obstinate. She went and got a pamphlet, and she came back and she showed Suzanne. Rachel had been hiding this from her the entire conference. Everyone had been hiding it from Suzanne. And I'm sitting there watching this unfold as it's happening. And this lady walks up and she says, look, this is you. You're the Pro-Life Woman of the Year. And sure enough, Suzanne won the award, or received the award for Pro-Life Woman of the Year at the I can't remember the name of the conference right now, but it was put on by Abby Johnson, Sidewalk Advocates for Life, and Students for Life. So Suzanne is amazing, and I appreciate everything that she does for the pro-life movement. I will tell you this. I spent most of last night and all of today writing a speech. It's great. And I'm not going to use it. I'm going to keep it up here just in case I get lost in my thoughts so that I don't have to just stand here and look awkward. But between things Suzanne said and things Father Joseph said and things that Mike said, I think God kind of led me, much like Suzanne said, that her mother told her, you worry and you don't ask, and God just kind of is leading tonight. So I want to start with something that she said about when she mentioned Abby Johnson. Many of you, because many of you are active in the pro-life movement, you may know of the comments and the videos that Abby Johnson has put out recently. For those of you who don't, look it up. It's a long story. But basically what Abby has come out and said is that she supports the prosecution of women. I'm not getting into whether or not the prosecution of women is the right move at this time. I have my own thoughts on that are different from people on that side and different from people on the other side. But I went and watched her the Thursday before the March for Life. So that Thursday morning, I was honored to be able to speak at the Pro-Life Advocates Conference that's put on by the March for Life. And as I spoke, like I do every time I speak, I pointed out my son, who's 11 and who is on the video camera. He comes with me everywhere I go and is my videographer. And I point out that as men, it is important for us to lead in the pro-life movement, because as we lead, the next generation of young men will follow, right? And that generation of men has the power to end abortion. And that's the way that I have always put it. And then I went and heard Abby Johnson speak, and the things that she said that I agreed with 100% were, when people tell me I hope to see you next year, I say I hope not. And she said, I don't want to end abortion in 20 years. I want to end abortion today. And I think that's a really big deal. And I would encourage anyone who isn't familiar with her comments or familiar with all the things that are going on since those comments to pay attention. Because regardless of whether you fall in line with the things she said or you don't, things are starting to change. A really great place to get information on this is the Men for Life podcast. I've been interviewing people on every single different perspective of this. I'll be ending with a friendly face, but I'll also be interviewing the abolitionists. So every single perspective will be getting interviewed on our YouTube channel so that people can make their own decisions. But I want to end abortion today. It's unfair for me to stand here or to stand on any other stage and to suggest that I'm going to put it on my son and his generation to end abortion. So then the question becomes how, right? And that's where the different thoughts come in. And I think that the abolitionists will tell you that they have a plan. I think that everyone else will tell you that abolitionists don't have a plan. And I think that when it comes to how do we end abortion today, I don't think anyone else has a plan. And so even though I don't agree with their plan today, the pro-life establishment, everyone else, needs to step up and come up with a plan, whatever that may be. Because the only thing that they're saying is, we cannot prosecute women ever, because for 53 years, Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry has fed them lies, and they are now the victims of these lies. And that's true. I agree with that. That is a true statement. But if in 20 years, the pro-life establishment is saying, well, for 73 years, Planned Parenthood has been feeding them these lies, and so they are the victims of these lies. Or in 40 years, if they are saying, for 93 years, Planned Parenthood has been feeding them these lies, and they are the victims of these lies, and we're not doing anything to change that, this cannot be a perpetual excuse. This is a problem that we have to solve. Sorry, that got me a little worked up. So I want to end abortion today. The other thing that, that Father Joseph said that I think is really important, and it's something that I always say is, and this gets into that part of the conversation, he talked about unity. And that's where with Men for Life and the podcast that I'm doing right now and the work that I'm doing in these conversations is to try to find unity amongst the people on both sides and in the middle. Because if we're not working together, then we're working apart. And I think it's really important that we all recognize that if anyone in the pro-life movement ever finds themselves in the legislature sitting next to Planned Parenthood in opposition of a pro-life bill, we're in the wrong seat. We are not in the right place. If we're using the same words that Planned Parenthood uses, like criminalization, nobody wants to criminalize women. I'm going to say that right now. I don't care what anyone else is saying. Nobody wants women to go to jail. We want women to not have abortions. And if no one's having abortions, no one goes to jail. But when we use that rhetoric of criminalization, we're pitting ourselves against ourselves. And we need to work together. I think unity is really important. And I think another place that unity is really important is when it comes to men and women in the pro-life movement or in the pro-life conversation. I think that we can all recognize that we are in a spiritual war, right? We are in a spiritual war, and the greatest tool that the devil has is the separation of the union between God and man and woman. It starts in the garden when he pulls Eve aside and he whispers lies into her ears. Satan is the father of lies, John 8:44. And he says, you cannot be everything that you are created to be unless you do the one thing that God told you not to do. You cannot be strong enough, capable enough, good enough, unless you do the one thing that God told you not to do. Unless you eat this fruit, you cannot be the woman you're created to be. Unless you get rid of this baby, you cannot be the woman that you were created to be. And so she ate the fruit. And then what? And then she turned and gave it to her husband, who was right there. Adam was right there, watching, silent, passive, waiting, probably thinking, it's her mouth, it's her choice. If she eats this apple, the consequences are on her. And what a horrible miscalculation. Because original sin is not the product of the failure of a woman to listen to God. Original sin is the product of the complete and utter failure of masculinity. It's the product of Adam being passive and silent and failing to lead, to protect, to provide, and to serve. Biblical masculinity means to protect, to provide, to lead, and serve, to leave a legacy that honors God. Adam's passivity and silence failed on all accounts, and he left a legacy of death. And my friends, that is where we are today with abortion. Men sitting silently on the sidelines, not stepping up. We have been fed the same lies for 53 years. This has nothing to do with us. Abortion is a women's issue. Abortion is about health care. Abortion is about bodily autonomy. You just want to control our bodies. You just want to force 10-year-old rape victims to give birth. That's the fastest way to shut a man down. Because what's a man going to say? Like, I'll go play golf. I don't want to force 10-year-old rape victims to give, I don't want to be thought of like that. I'm just going to avoid this all the way. And I have to ask you, why is it that child rape accounts for less than 0.5% of all abortions and 99.9% of all pro-choice arguments? It's because it works. They don't care about the rape victims. They have no problem preying on victims of the most heinous crime imaginable to prop up their argument that they cannot make without them. And they can't make it because it's based on lies. And how do we fight the lies? Well, Ephesians 6:13 through 14 tells us that the very first thing we must do whenever we're putting on the full armor of God is put on the belt of truth. Truth is the most powerful weapon that we have against Satan and against this spiritual warfare. And the truth is that abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human life. It's not a women's issue, it's a human issue. We don't want women to kill babies, we don't want men to kill babies. Like, this is equality. For it to be unequal would be to say men can kill babies and women can't. Nobody can kill babies. That's equality. The truth is that abortion affects women in a negative way. There are so many studies out right now. There's over a dozen studies and meta-analysis that show that women who have abortions are 2 to 6 times more likely to commit, not to attempt, to commit suicide. 81% more likely to have mental health issues. If we as men are failing to lead, to protect, and to provide for women in this instance of abortion, we are failing women as well as babies. Abortion affects men. There's a study out of Denmark, and the fascinating thing about this study is that it's using socialized medicine. The only good thing to come out of socialized medicine is data, numbers, because all they do is they track from point A to point B, and they can track you. It's not voluntary. These are not pro-life men. Denmark is not a pro-life country. And what this study found, studying 8,221 men who all had lost a child to abortion, was that men who lost a child to abortion were 4.5 times more likely to seek mental health professionals. They were 90% more likely to require antidepressants, 79% more likely to require prescription sleep aids, and 74% more likely to require anti-anxiety medicines. Not a voluntary study. These men didn't, they might still not know that they were analyzed. But abortion affects men. Abortion affected me. On December 13th, 2005, I was lying face down on a carpet in a dirty hotel room, unable to move and overdosing on methamphetamine. I was homeless, unemployed, and at the end of a 7-year addiction. And in that moment, after years of failing and praying, hey God, just help me out one more time. Let me out of this one more time, and I won't ever do it again. And then going right back to it over and over and over. On December 13, 2005, there was nothing inside of me that told me that I believed that prayer. There was nothing inside of me that told me that I believed that God would believe that prayer. Everything inside of me told me that if I died in that hotel room, that would be my one last embarrassing hurrah to my family, the way I left them finding me. And so I prayed. I prayed that God would help me out of that situation, not because I cared whether I lived or died, but because I did not want my family to be embarrassed that I was found dead of an overdose in a hotel room. And he listened, and I passed out. And when I woke up the next day, my head was more clear than it had been in that entire period. And I got up, and I went down to my truck that I'd been living out of, and I stuck my hand behind the driver's seat without even looking and reached through all the trash and pulled out a pamphlet to a treatment center that had been shoved down there for over 2 years. And I went back to the room and I called, and they said that I could get in that day. So I called my dad, who hadn't talked to me in a month because of the things that I had done to my family and the boundaries that he finally set after years and years and years. And he answered, and I told him what was going on because I was supposed to be arrested. I had been told not to leave that room. And I told him what was going on, and I told him I could get into treatment. And he said, just go. Tell them where you're going to be, and if they want to come find you and arrest you, they'll come find you. And that's what I did. And I went, and I got in this truck that hadn't had an oil change or maintenance in 5 years. And I drove 3.5 hours through a national forest, just praying, God, let me get through this forest, because this is before cell phones. But get me through this forest so I can at least, if I die, if my car dies, I can at least make it somewhere. And I made it through the forest, and I got to Shreveport, Louisiana, where the treatment center was, and I started hitting hills for the first time. And when I started hitting hills, my truck started shaking. And I was praying, God, just let me make it into the parking lot. Just let me make it to the treatment center. And I made it to the treatment center, and I pulled into the parking lot, and my truck broke down. Amen. And I was safe. There was nowhere to go. There was no way to get there. There was no one to call. There was no way to call them. No one would have answered had I called at that point anyway. And I was safe. And in treatment, when I met with these amazing counselors and they started helping me to work through my life, and how did you go from point A to point B? Like, how did you get here? And I'm telling all these stories, and the counselor said, we should really talk about this. And I didn't know what she was talking about, and she kept going. We need to talk about this. And so we did. And what we talked about was 8 years earlier, I was 19 years old and I was away at college. And my girlfriend at the time walked into my room and she told me that she was pregnant. And so in my mind, I started talking about all the things that we got to do. Because there's a baby coming. Like, I wasn't ready. I wasn't really excited, but there was a baby coming. And as I'm talking through this, she stopped me and she said, well, I'm not going to have this baby. I'm going to have an abortion. And keep in mind, this is before the internet. Like, the internet existed, but it was a place you went to download songs very slowly. And so this is before people shouting their abortion, right? This is before social media. This is before TikTok. Abortion wasn't something that people shouted. Abortion was something people did silently in the shadows, right? This was not something that I didn't know anybody that had ever had an abortion. I knew what it was, but I didn't know that it was something people did. And so I was just floored. And she said, I'm going to have an abortion. And I said, no, like, we can't have an abortion. And it was made very clear to me, no matter how many times I said that nothing that I said, nothing that I did, nothing that I felt mattered. She was going to have an abortion. And that was compounded when the young lady who began struggling with school, of course, after the abortion, went to the counselors, and the counselors helped her to waive her classes. And so I went to the counselors the next day, the same counselor, and I said, this is the person you talked to yesterday. This is the story that she told you. I'm the other part of that story. I'm struggling too. This is what you did to help her waive her classes. And she said, no, this does not affect you because you're a man. And so for the next 8 years, I failed out of college. I moved home. I failed out of college 2 more times and began a life of destructive behavior that ended with me laying face down on a carpet, overdosing on methamphetamine. And it wasn't until I was in treatment and the counselors started helping me to work through my life that somebody said, hey, we should talk about this. And looking at it objectively, my life was going like this until the abortion, and then it crashed. But because I was told this doesn't affect you, because I was told that nothing that you do, nothing that you say, nothing that you feel matters, that's what I thought. And at no point in time during that 8-year period of destructive behavior did I ever connect the way that I felt to the abortion until I was in treatment. And I don't know what kind of training this lady had, but from the people that I've talked to in abortion healing, like, she must have had some amazing training, because she helped me to do a lot of the same things that people do on abortion healing retreats. She helped me to write letters to my son asking for forgiveness, letters to my younger self and to the mother, forgiving them. She helped me to name my child. I named him Michael. And she helped me to just begin that healing process. And because she helped me to begin that healing process, I was also able to begin the healing process from the drugs and the other destructive behavior. The one thing that she didn't tell me was, you're not alone. There's other men. And so I thought I was the only man who had ever dealt with this. So I did the things that you do when you leave treatment. Like, I got my life together. I went back to college. I went to law school. I married a woman that I'd been pursuing for 7 years, but who God had been protecting from me while he was building me into the man that she deserved. I started a law firm. We started having kids. And then I went on a retreat. And on this retreat, men were sharing these amazingly vulnerable stories that were just sometimes gut-wrenching, things that had happened to them, things that they had done in their lives, that they were asking for forgiveness from. And I was watching these men who I knew, who were sharing these stories, and nobody was judging them. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that I can just say anything that I want here and I will not be judged. And I can finally unload this. And I did. And it was amazing. But what was amazing was not the fact that by me finally unloading it, it helped me to heal. What was amazing was what happened next. And I had 3 men come up to me afterwards and say, I have never told anyone this. 20 years, 30 years. Men who had pushed for abortion, men who had fought against abortion, but I had lost my child when I was in college. Men who felt that they were alone and they were the only one. These men knew each other, but they thought that they were alone in this. And I realized that when I share my story, it's not about me, because it opens the door for other men to begin to heal. Because the reason men don't talk about abortion is because men don't talk about abortion. And so I began sharing my story. And as I'm sharing my story, we continued growing our family. We had 2 biological kids. We adopted 3 more. And then in 2021, I looked up and I've got 5 kids, and I'm really good at practicing law. And I'm really bad at practicing law and being a present husband and father. And so I quit. And in 2022, I shut down my office. And in 2022, Men for Life, which is a national pro-life organization that was started by a 15-year-old young man in 2018. In 2022, they started asking me if I would come and run the organization. And I said, heck no. I have no idea how to run a nonprofit. I do have an idea how much you're going to pay me. And I don't think that's what God wants for me. And I said no for 18 months. And while I said no for 18 months, I continued working on a business plan. And I hired a really expensive consultant out of California. And in June of 2024, I was on an airplane to go meet this consultant on a business plan that was ready to roll out the next week. We'd been working on it for 8 months, and I was ready to go. And on that airplane, on the way to California, God said, you are going to go run this nonprofit. And it was not a question. It was a command. And it was clear. And so I got off the plane defiantly. I got off the plane and I walked into that meeting, and I had a giant stack of papers, and I set them all down on the table, and I said, here's everything we've been working on, and I am ready to go. But listen to what just happened. And what I wanted was for this consultant to say, this is a horrible idea, so that I could blame him for not listening to God. And instead, he said, this is a great idea. And I think this will get you everything that you've been telling me that you want to get out of life. And here's the things that I'm going to help you do to grow this business. So I got back on the airplane and I emailed Men for Life, and I said, hey, I know we haven't talked in 4 months and that you're probably not just hanging out for the rest of your lives waiting for Sean Corcoran to make a decision. But if you're still looking, I'll take the job. And so in August of 2024, I accepted a position with Men for Life. Now, Men for Life has evolved a lot since I took over. You know, the young man who started it went straight to work for Louisiana Right to Life, which took away his ability to grow a separate nonprofit. And so I really took it over as a brand new project. And in doing that, we've got 2 initiatives that we're working on. The first is a fatherhood program for pregnancy centers. I showed up to my first pro-life conference in April of last year, and all I had was a table and a banner and a belief that God was going to show me what he wanted me to do. And at that conference, I had 104 different pregnancy centers walk up and ask me the exact same questions. Keep in mind, all I had was a giant banner behind me that said Men for Life. And they asked the exact same three questions. It was so busy that during breaks, other booths who had been going to these conferences for years came up and said, "What do you sell? Like, how do you have so much traffic?" And I was like, God is doing this. I have no idea what's going on right now. And the questions that they asked were, number one, do you have a fatherhood program? Because they recognize, and now we have data, 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life. 97%. All this idea that the men are driving the abortions, I'm not saying there's not bad men, but I want to be clear. All the idea that the men are driving the abortions and that men don't want to have anything to do with it, like, don't pay attention to that. If we reach the men, then we can save the babies. That's just a true statement. How do you get them to stay in a fatherhood program, right? So that was the second question. Once we get the man to see the ultrasound, how do we get them to come back? And the third question was, how do we get men in our community to facilitate these programs? Because as women, and many times the pregnancy centers are run completely by women, as women, we know that we are not in the best position to help these men. And so after the 15th person asked me if we had a fatherhood program, I just started saying yes. Yes, we are currently in the development of a fatherhood program, which in my mind, I was working through, how are we going to do this? Because this is what God wants me to do. So yes. And so that's what we've been, that's what we started working on. And here's the thing, man. Like, the reason that they can't get the men to come back is because the programs that exist are teaching these young men how to change a diaper. They're teaching these young men how to bottle feed. Look, all these skills are super important, and you learn them on the job, right? Like, I learned how to change a diaper. I tell everybody, usually I'm telling this story while I'm on a podcast looking at my bookshelf, where my first copy of What to Expect When Expecting is still sitting there completely unopened. My oldest is 11. And it's not going to be opened. Now it's just there so I can tell that story. And so how do you get a young man to come back if you're telling him, a 19, 20, 21-year-old man who may or may not be in a relationship with the mom, like, we'll teach you how to change diapers? Like, you're not competing with what he's got going on in his life. So we have to find a way to compete. Well, if we think about that, most of these young men didn't have a father, didn't have a male role model, didn't have somebody positive in their life pouring into them. That's where we compete, right? We compete. The program that we are building is based on principles of biblical masculinity. We start out by saying, you can be greater than you have ever been told you can be. And just a man telling him this and listening to him is more impactful than anything else. So that when he leaves that room, after he leaves that first conversation with the man and he sees the ultrasound, he's already excited about being a man. And now he knows, this is where I can learn this, right? Like, you're telling me that I can live for something greater than myself and that you can show me how to do that here? Because that's it. That's the sale. Like, you're just trying to get them to come back. And in the first week, you're just trying to get them to come back. So building on that over and over and over, and we're not even talking about pregnancy until week 7, because when they come in 10 weeks with an ultrasound, you've got time, right? Diapers will come, bottles will come, swaddling will come. But how do we get him to become a good man and be excited about being a good man so that he can be the person that she needs, whether they're in a relationship or not? And then that third question was, how do you get men in the community to step up and fulfill this role? How do we get men to mentor? And, you know, there's a couple of things that I say to get men involved, and I found that they've been really impactful. And I'll tell you this, you guys are getting the long version tonight, but I did something in October where I was just a guest at a pregnancy center banquet, and she said, hey, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to get up and talk. So I had 2 sentences, right? So I used these two taglines or whatever you want, sound bites. And the first is that if we can agree that abortion is a spiritual war, and if we can acknowledge that 90% of those fighting this war, the boots on the ground every day, are women, then if we as men have consigned ourselves to show up to fundraisers and write checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight, then we are failing in our masculinity. We have to do more. We are called to give our time, our talent, and our treasure. Not our time, our talent, or our treasure. And the second thing that I tell people is that as men, and I think this is a generational thing, right? I think that in World War II, the men came back and they looked at the next generation and they thought, there's no hope, right? Like, these guys don't know how to be men. And it still persists. We still do this today. Except today we have the data. Today we know that fatherlessness is an epidemic. There's so much data to show what happens when there's fatherlessness. And we know that the next generation of young men doesn't stand a chance if we don't fill that gap. And so if we as men are going to sit back and complain about how the next generation of men doesn't know how to be men, knowing that they didn't have a male role model, but refusing to fill that void, then we are failing in our own masculinity. And sharing these things gets to the heart of a man. Because as men in our generation, right? And when I say our generation, I really mean anyone over the age of 35. Like, we want to shelter in the next generation of young men. Like, that's why so many men are coaches. Like, we want to help these young men become better men. But we have to be given a role. We have to be given a place. And so that's where the Men for Life Fatherhood program really comes in. And then the second thing is, I recognize that as I would speak at pregnancy centers and pro-life functions, and I would say these things, that men would come up to me and say, I'm in, what can I do? And I was calling them to action, and I was getting them excited about doing more than writing checks, but I wasn't giving them anything to do. And so the second initiative that Men for Life was working on right now is called the Men for Life Arena, where we are providing an online community that will break out into chapters eventually for men to become equipped to speak boldly and stand confidently for life. You know, having mentorship with pro-life leaders, having mentorship on masculinity, having mentorship on business and finance, and helping men in our generation to grow as men so that we can save the next generation. I'm just ignoring the timekeeper. I see what time it is. That's what happens when you throw away your whole speech. So let me go. This is going to be really interesting because I'm gonna guess that Mike has heard what I'm about to say because the things that he said were very similar. So I'm gonna attribute it to the person that I heard it from though, and his name is Cowboy Dwayne. You know, and something Mike said was, politics is downstream from culture and culture is downstream from the church. And I think that's really important. I saw an interview with a guy named Cowboy Dwayne. And he's just a good old boy who uses his ranch and his cowboy skills to help men connect with being men. And what Cowboy Dwayne said was, this country is only as strong as the churches in this country. The churches are only as strong as the families in the churches. Those families are only as strong as the marriages that those families are built on, and those marriages are only as strong as the man that God built those marriages on. As goes the man, so goes the marriage. As goes the marriage, so goes the family. As goes the family, so goes the churches. And as goes the churches, so goes the country. Everything is built upon the husband and the father. And this country is a failure today because the husbands and fathers have failed. Now, whether we agree that our country is a failure today, I think we can all agree that our country is failing at abortion. Abortion numbers are rising. I live in Louisiana where there aren't any abortions. Last year there was 10,000. Texas, there's no abortions. Last year there was 30,000. In Georgia, in 2024, there was 41,340 abortions. 80% of the abortion pills shipped through the mail are sent to pro-life states. They tell us that late-term abortions don't happen, yet they keep popping up in states across the country, marketing 34 weeks 34-week surgical abortion, like no questions asked, but they don't happen. Last month, Wyoming Supreme Court struck down abortion bans. We partially defunded Planned Parenthood last year, only to return some of the money this year. As we stand here today, if we look at the whole picture, America is failing as it comes to abortion. And I agree with Cowboy Dwayne, this falls on the husbands and the fathers. 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. That's based on the Gallup poll. The Gallup poll is not a pro-life organization. 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. 41% identify as pro-choice. We have the numbers. So if we're losing, it's because we're not doing anything with the numbers. Sir Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. We cannot afford to do nothing. And if we say, just as men is called to lead their families and lead their communities, the churches, as Mike pointed out, are called to lead as well. When churches fail to speak about abortion from the altar, everyone hears what is not said. The men in the congregations hear that abortion is not important enough for them to lead their families on. The young men and young women in the congregation hear that abortion must not be a big deal because our church talks about a lot of things, but they don't talk about abortion. And the men and women in the pews who have suffered through abortion, who have lost a child to abortion, who have partaken in an abortion, who have pushed for it or fought against it, what they hear is that their sin is not forgivable. It is not redeemable. When the churches fail to speak about abortion from the altar, they are failing to protect God's message that every single human being is an image bearer of God, worthy of life and respect, and that abortion is an attack on the very image of God. I point out all the time that I'll be 48 next week. I went to Catholic school, and in 48 years, I have never, ever, I could do that all night and you'd get bored, ever heard a priest from the altar talk about abortion in a church that I was in during Mass. Ever. I did a men's conference, and I asked the question, how many of you remember the last time your priest talked about abortion? 15 hands rose, and one priest. All 15 of them went to his church. That's a big deal. You know, and the problem that I have with that is that people say all the time that the Catholic Church has been leading on this, but the Catholic Church has been leading on this, but not from the altar. And that's where we are, right? We're sitting in the pews. And when I talk to people, you know, because not everybody here is Catholic, right? And not everyone that I talk to is Catholic. I understand this is a universal problem. That this is a problem that happens amongst all Christian churches. And there's 3 reasons that priests and pastors generally give. The first is, we don't do politics. Let me assure you, abortion is not a political issue. Abortion is a human issue, and abortion is a spiritual issue. And if you as a pastor or priest say, we don't do politics, you are giving the enemy the option to overtake every single issue that is important to you and bring it into the political realm. You're doing his work for him. The second objection is, well, we're going to lose people. And sometimes they mean donors. But if your objection is we're going to lose people, my question to you is, whose message are you preaching? Because in John 6:53 through 58, after Jesus fed the 5,000, he said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will not have eternal life. And he lost many people, and he did not chase them down. Jesus was not scared to preach the truth despite the chance that he would lose followers, because he was not in this for followers. He was not building a following. He was helping people to reach salvation and helping people to get to heaven. And that is our goal, and we cannot get people to heaven if we are not preaching the truth. And the third objection is, well, we don't want to offend the people in our pews who have had abortions. My friend, the people who have had abortions in your pews are hurting. And your failure to address the topic head on is way more offensive than if you were to share the message of truth. Abortion will not end until men in the church both lead boldly. I have a friend who I went to law school with. She has a young son. I think she's single. I think her son just turned 5. When I started this job with Men for Life and I started posting regularly about abortion, I post a lot on social media, and generally the responses are not positive. But that's the people that I'm posting for, right? Because if I'm only posting to people who agree with me, then I'm not going to get anything done. And she came at me violently in the beginning. Like, her messages were hurtful, her messages were vile, her messages were mean and cruel, and she felt like I was an enemy to women and that I was telling her that her son was going to be a horrible person, and I just kept going. And 2 weeks ago, she sent me a message. And she said, I haven't shared this before. And she said, you've really changed my mind in a really short time. And it doesn't have anything to do with me, right? None of it has anything to do with me. God did not put me in this position because he wanted to glorify Sean, right? God put me in this position because it gave me an opportunity to share the truth with other people so that we can glorify God. And that glorifies God, right? Bringing someone to the other side by sharing the message of truth over and over and over and over and over in the face of hate and opposition. That's what this is about. And that's the power that men have when they lead. That's the power that churches have when they lead. That's the power that every single one of you has when you stand on the sidewalk and you hold up those signs and you pray. Because people see that. People see the work that you're doing, and people want to know why. And somebody's passing by and somebody's thinking, God, those people are annoying. You know, and after they pass by the 100th time, they're thinking, God, those people are convicted. And after they pass by the 200th time, they're thinking, I want to know what they're thinking that makes them so convicted. And eventually, they will come around. So to the men, I just want to say, the passivity is a failure of masculinity, and silence in the face of evil is a failure of masculinity. And the reason that the abortion industry and all those who support it are so quick to try to get men to sit down and shut up is because they know the power our voices have. They know that when men reject the lie that abortion only affects women and stand courageously against the opposition, that they will lose. They know that if every single one of us boldly and proudly proclaims that we are pro-life and we are willing to fight to end abortion, that the next generations of young men and boys will see that example and will aspire to live it. That if we reject silence and passivity, then the next generations won't even see it as an option. And my friends, that is how we will change the culture, and that is how we will end abortion. So as you move forward over the next 40 days in prayer, I ask that you not only pray for the babies and the mothers and the fathers as they go into those clinics, pray also for the men in this country and for the churches, that they step up and speak boldly and confidently, proclaiming for all to hear that life is valuable at all stages, and that we will not stop working to the glory of God until He has delivered us by His might from the evil of abortion. Thank you, and God bless you.